One of the questions that I get asked a lot is which is my preference over leather harness or bio harness? And my answer is that I really prefer leather harness. And there's quite a few reasons why. There is no right answer though. Both leather and bio work just fine and can be extremely safe and fun for driving. It all comes down to personal preference. The reason that my personal preference is always going to be with leather is that number one is that if you're using your horses a lot in a lot of hot weather where they're sweating a lot, then bio is going to create little rub spots on them. It's kind of like if you wore rubber shoes out on a hot day, how much that would wear onto your feet. Compared to leather, those are going to conform to your foot and they're going to adjust as you sweat into them. The bio is going to create little wear spots, whereas the leather, as the horse sweats into it, it stretches in the spots it's supposed to stretch and it'll actually tighten in other places. So it's a very, almost like a living thing that you're putting on top of your horse. It changes as you use your horse. One of the other things too that I like to ask people is I say, which would you prefer for a shoe? If you looked at your own shoes, would you prefer a leather shoe or a rubber shoe? And the answer most times for people who are out working is going to be that they're going to prefer a leather shoe. And it's the same reason that I prefer the leather harness. It's going to adjust to your foot and it's going to fit your foot better the more you wear it. The same thing with this leather harness. Every time I use it, it works better and better and better after that. One of the last reasons I really like leather is that it's a highly renewable resource. Leather, we're growing cows in the US every single day. We have lots of cattle, and oil, there's only so much oil, and that's a product, the bio harness is made out of oil, whereas this leather harness is made out of cows, and we grow lots of cows. So they're highly sustainable, highly renewable, and also very good product as far as for the safety and comfort of your horse. So my personal preference is this. It's a-okay if that's not your personal preference. The bio is going to be a lot stronger. When they introduced bio into the marketplace, then people started to really notice, harness makers noticed that they were no longer getting broken straps. They were starting to get broken buckles because it rips out buckles before it breaks the strap because it's so strong. So for some applications, that strength is really essential, and in those instances, it's really important to have that. But really, it just ultimately comes down to your personal choice. So now that we've covered the 4 systems of the harness and the 3 systems of the vehicle, we're going to go ahead and show you how to put the 4 systems of the harness onto the horse. So remember that we have a pleasure driving harness here. There's going to be a lot of variances to harnesses, and a lot of harnesses are going to have little things. This is going to be generally how 99% of them are going to be here in the US. If you have one that's a little different, you should be able to look at it through that filter that we've talked about before. It's pulling, steering, braking, and communication. Those are the 4 systems. So what you're going to really want to do is look at and say, okay, I have this goofy little strap on here. What's this for? And go ahead and use it through that filter. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our harness. The way that we're going to pick up our harness is we're going to put our left hand up here on the saddle, and we're going to go ahead and pull that over the fence here to us. And then my right hand is going to grab the hip strap assembly up here where the britchin comes off of the hip strap, and we're going to hold it like this. Okay, so we're going to look at it, and what I want to be able to see is I want to be able to see where a horse would fit in there. If you can kind of see that there's no twists, turns, or anything else, I can see that I just have it ready to go onto a horse. What a lot of people do wrong is they'll have this twisted around here like this and up over like this, and then they'll go to the horse before they get it organized. Organization is really important, that you have your organization first. So you organize your harness and then you go to the horse. Okay? So another thing a lot of people do on accident is they like to think that maybe a horse would like to be pet with the harness. And I had my wife try it one time. She pet me with this harness. It didn't feel very good. Okay? It's pokey, it's scratchy, it doesn't have a whole lot to it that's going to feel real nice and warm to the horse. But what does feel nice is my hand. Okay, so my left hand, to free it up to be able to pet the horse and approach the horse, all that I do is I take what's in my left hand, which is the saddle, and I set it with my right hand. Okay, then all I have to do is I can approach the horse, and I could tend the horse. If I had her loose, if I needed to not have her tied, then I could have her loose. I could have the lead rope in this hand. I could approach the horse and make sure that she's not bothered. The thing that I would not want to do is I would not want to approach her with the harness first. It's a lot like your saddle. You don't walk up to your horse saddle first, right? It's the same thing with the harness. We want to be able to walk up with it over here. I'll pet my horse, make sure she's good. Make sure she kind of sees the harness. This horse has been harnessed quite a few times, so she's not real worried about the harness. She doesn't need to sniff it or anything. So I'll take the harness, and what I do is I just swing the surcingle up and over top of her back, and I keep the main body of the harness down here with me. Okay, so I've got the main body of the harness, surcingle up on her back. Then I keep this all real nice and organized, and I lay the britchin and the kick strap up over the small of her back. It's going to be right there at her loin. Okay, I don't want to put it too far back. The reason why I don't want to put it too far back is that if it's too far back, it's going to pull this back strap, and if it pulls the back strap, it'll pull the surcingle out of position. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is set the surcingle. You want to think of your surcingle as kind of like the anchor of the harness. This is what the whole harness is going to hold on to on the front up here. Okay, so I set that in place. Then I go ahead and reach under, grab my girth, just like you would for your saddle horse. Okay, we'll reach under there, and we can go ahead and cinch her up. The proper amount of tension on this is, we say it's a lot like your belt. You want it to be tight enough to hold it in place, hold your pants in place, but not so tight as to be cutting you off in the middle. Okay, so it's the same thing here. I want to be able to have my surcingle not really go anywhere. I want it to stay in place, but I don't want it so tight that I'm cutting her off. It's not like your saddle. It's more like, kind of like more like a flank cinch sort of a thing. Okay, another thing to remember as you're going along, if you do notice that this horse that you have that knows how to drive is having a hard time getting the harness put on or something like that, that you really need to go back and assess, like, why is this problem happening, and work on it within your training. Okay, that's really important that you not gloss over. If I cinch up my horse and she gets tight all of a sudden, then I need to take that feedback from her and work on that within a more of a training mindset and less of a using mindset. Remember, right now we're in the mindset of my horse knows how to drive, so I'm going to drive it, right? But if you're in that mindset, it's really important that you not gloss over any feedback that your horse gives you. Your horse should harness just like this. It should just stay totally relaxed, and when you girth him up or cinch him up, it shouldn't bother him at all. Okay, so we've got our surcingle set. So now that we have that set, we can step back here and we can slide our britchin back into place. Slide our britchin back into place like that. So it's all starting to look like the harness is going to look when she goes to be driven. You have up here, you have your shav shackle, okay? And we're not going to buckle that yet. We're going to buckle that once we have her hitched, not yet. We want to keep this shav loop free. The other side, same thing. We want to keep it unbuckled until we get her hitched. Okay, then we'll step back here. We'll go ahead and do the crupper for her here. And we'll do the crupper just like we showed you earlier in part 1 of this series. We don't want to lift the tail straight up. That's not a real natural movement for a horse. If you watch horses swat flies, they stand there and they do this. Okay, they rock their tail back and forth. That doesn't really bother a horse near as much as if you lift it up like you're giving a proctology exam. Okay, I want to just slide the tail to the side. So I'll slide her tail, pull the crupper under, pull the tail out of the britchin, and then bring the crupper up and buckle it in. Always make sure that I don't have any extra little tail hairs here getting stuck underneath the crupper, okay? If you have that, it's going to create an uncomfortable spot and it'll create a wear spot on her tail head, okay? So we want to not have any pressure there. Okay, so we've got the main part of the body of the harness on. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our pulling system on. Okay, so the gas pedal essentially, what makes our cart go forward. And so what we'll do is we'll take our breast strap. A trick that I learned that my dad was really big into that I really like is we always keep our traces tied up. Okay, the reason why is that, can you see if I have these traces, there's a lot of space here. This is a really big, long, messy thing, and it's really hard to have much grace in the way that you put it onto the horse, right? Because it's so long and I'm so short, especially me, I'm short. So I want to make sure that I set myself up for it to be as easy as possible. So what I do is I just take these traces and I tie them in a big overhand knot like that, okay? And the reason why is that it's gonna keep it up. It's never hurt the traces. I've had harnesses I've kept tied for, 20 or 30 years that were my dad's harnesses that as soon as you undo them and hook them up, they go back straight immediately. So it's not a problem as far as that's concerned. So we have a breast strap here. This is our pulling system again. And what people do wrong all the time is that they, one, either try and go over the head with the breast strap, or they try and go under here like this. They do this, and then they reach over like this, and they get it like that, and then they do it up like that, okay? And I did that for a lot of years. But the problem with that is that this is a very important part of a horse. That makes sense? This is where the blood flows, this is where the air flows, this is where a lot of things that are essential to her living, that's where they are. And when an animal comes in here to eat her, it's gonna grab a hold of her throat, okay? And so I just came in here and went for a throat, and most horses, when you do that, they lift their head up, okay? They don't stay nice and relaxed with the head down, their head goes up. So what I like to do is I actually like to go over the top. So what I do, take the shoulder strap and make sure it's on the right side, okay? It's on the right hand side. Then what I do is I lay it up over top of her wither, let it go down there, and then I just rotate it around so that it's in the perfect position to be buckled up here. And you'll notice that, if anything, is going to encourage her to put her head down, right? Because I'm putting the pressure up here, and it's going to encourage her to lower her head, okay? Not encouraging her to lift her head if I went down here. It's a lot nicer for the horse. Horses enjoy it a lot better, okay? As soon as I get my breast strap on, I'm going to untie my trace, put it underneath my shav loop, lay it up over her back, and then I'll go around and do the same thing on the other side. So what we've talked about so far is how to put the harness onto the horse, and what we're going to get into now is how to adjust it properly. To teach you about how to adjust it properly, I've got my lovely assistant, my wife, Amy Bowers here. And what we're going to do is we need to first think about the horse's center of gravity, okay? I want to use Amy first to teach you about center of gravity, and then we'll look at it in reference to the horse, okay? So for Amy, I have this rein right here, and I've taken it and put it around her waist, okay? This was part of our courting ritual right here. But anyway, so she has it around her waist, okay? And her center of gravity is going to be right around her belly button, okay? So if she took it and put it down low, below her center of gravity, and I was able to pull on this, what would happen, right? Can you see what would happen is I would pull her legs out from underneath her if I was below the center of gravity. If you put it up at your center of gravity, and I could pull her along, right? And she could kind of see how that didn't take her legs out from under her at all. And then if she put it up under her armpits, way above her center of gravity, then I could still pull her. That makes sense? So of the three settings, one being at the center of gravity, one being above the center of gravity, one being below the center of gravity, the one that would knock her down would be the one below the center of gravity. Can you see that? Okay, and the ones that set her up to be able to put the most power into fighting against me would be the ones at or above, right? So if you were to pull against me, there you go. See how she has the maximum power. It's kind of like I never saw anybody go to push a rail or push a truck or anything like that with their hands all the way down here. That makes sense? You never do that. You get your hands right at your center of gravity or a little above it. You also don't reach way above your center of gravity, right? Because you have no power there either. Your power is always going to be right at or a little bit above your center of gravity. So the same's true for the horse. Thanks, dear. Okay, so the same's true for the horse. And if we're going to adjust the harness on this horse, we really need to look at where is her center of gravity, okay? Her heart is going to be right in this area here, and her center of gravity is going to hang out right around there also, okay? So it's extremely important that as we drive her and as we adjust this harness, that we adjust it to where our line of draft and our line of braking draft, that they all are going to run through or above her center of gravity. So now that we know that about the center of gravity, we can start to look at how to actually adjust the harness to fit the horse properly. Okay, so the place to start always is with our anchor. We talked about when we put the harness on that the belly band and the surcingle here are what really anchors the harness in place. So we need to start here and get this adjusted into the proper position. Otherwise, all the other stuff won't make any sense. If we start with, say, the britchin and get this adjusted correctly, then we come up here and adjust our hip strap, and then come up here and adjust our saddle or our surcingle, then say we decide we're going to move it further forward. We'll slide it forward and see how that tightens the back strap, which moves the hip strap forward, which totally messes that up, which lifts the britchin, which messes that up. That makes sense? So we've got to make sure that we're starting with the surcingle, then working our way backward, kind of like, we call that clockwise, okay? So we want to work clockwise. We want to start here and work our way back so that we can get the proper adjustment. And the whole time we're thinking about what are the pressures on this horse, and are they going to be running through or above her center of gravity? Okay, so starting with the with the surcingle, we want to set it. It's going to naturally find its own little resting place depending on the angle of your horse's wither. Some horses with a real steep wither, it might sit just a little further back, and some horses with kind of more of a flat wither, or they're going to sit a little further forward. That's not of a whole lot of consequence in reference to our driving. We just want it to find a place where it's naturally going to set and where it's going to naturally stay put. Okay, our belly band and our tension there is, again, like what we talked about earlier. We want it to be like your belt. We want it to keep the saddle in place, but we also don't want it to be so strongly holding onto her that it's, we don't want to cut her wind off or anything like that. It does not need to be tight. Okay, so then moving along, our back strap, which is our first thing we come to that we can adjust, that adjusts the placement of the hip strap. Okay, so the back strap, so if you look, you can see how the hip strap is sewn into the back strap, and then it forks and goes down into the crupper. Okay, so the adjustment here affects where the hip strap lands on my horse's hip. Okay, so we all understand from basic horse anatomy that a horse with a short neck and a long back is not very desirable. That's not what we want. We don't want a horse with a short neck and a long back. We want a horse with a short back and a long neck, okay? And harness is really cool because we can create optical illusions by how we set our harness. Okay, so you can see that if I set this hip strap further back, it would naturally make her butt look smaller and it would make her back look longer. Can everybody see that? Okay, the further forward that we come, naturally, the bigger it's going to make her hind end look, which is what we want, right? And the shorter it's going to make her back look, okay? So aesthetically, we want that. I've seen horses where people have this hip strap all the way back here, and it still functions. I don't think it's ideal from a comfort standpoint. Comfort to me is going to be right up here from her loin to right about where it is right now. That's about as far back as I would ever want my hip strap to be. And the reason why too is that the further back it goes, as she trots, this part bounces more than this part, right? It's going to bounce. It's kind of like a giant lever. And the further back you go, the more your harness is going to bounce around. So like if you have kind of a horse that's a little more nervous, a lot of times moving that hip strap forward can really help because you're going to take a lot of bounce out of your harness. Okay, so now that we've got the hip strap assembly set, and we've got it set in its position, we can rotate down to setting the britchin height. What I want to look at to see if my britchin is okay is I need her first to stand up a little. There we go. And I want to be able to have her standing square. I need to be able to pull my hold back forward here and see that the line defined by the britchin there makes a nice straight line that runs through or above her center of gravity. If I'm driving my horse and I'm going downhill and I really feel like she's losing her legs, she's not very powerful, that's a really good sign that I need to go ahead and raise the britchin back up again. Okay, the britchin is safe all the way up. Like there's even some styles of harness that'll have the britchin up above the dock of the tail. They'll run all the way up here. Okay, so height, britchins can run real high. That's really okay. What's not okay is when the britchin is too low. Okay, too low of a britchin, one, it makes a horse look dumpy. So we were talking about the, making the horse look nice by putting our harness in the right positions. If it's too low, it's naturally going to make her butt look smaller, and it's going to naturally make her back look longer, all that sort of thing. If we raise it up, her butt looks bigger, and it's safer. From a 100% non-just aesthetic point of view, the safety is extremely important by having this line go through or above her center of gravity. Again, if it's going below it, she's gonna knock her feet. If it's above it, that's okay. Okay? So we've got the britchin, we've got the hip strap, we've got the surcingle. The next thing as we work along here is we can look at our shav loops. Okay, our shav loops, you'll notice that our line by the britchin is running right through the shav loop, which is ideal. It's the same thing, we want it to be right in her center of gravity or a little above her center of gravity. Okay? So then the last thing to adjust here would be our breast strap. You can see that with this adjustment, see how this would be below her center of gravity. If I was running this along and running this out here even, see how that's too low, okay? The breast strap, I really want to be as high as possible without cutting off her wind. Remember, this is what's pulling the vehicle. This is what's creating the power. And if it's too low, I'll have the same problem as we were talking about with the britchin. She's got bone and you can crush her front end, right? Like I don't want to crush her front end and I don't want to have her feel like she can't really step into the load, okay? She's built fairly similar to us. Just to simplify it, if you felt your own neck, you could feel it'd go muscle, 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 bone, right? As you work your way out, it goes to bone. It's going to be fairly similar for her. It's muscle, 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 bone. Okay, there's the bone, and I don't want there to be pressure on that bone. What a lot of people do wrong is they have that breast strap all the way down there, like that, and what happens is that the horse is having pressure and he's pushing right on that bone. It's not very comfortable for him. What works better is a whole lot higher. So I'll raise this up to the more appropriate height here. Raise it up. You can see how that's well above her bones. It's high enough that it's above her center of gravity now, right? It's going to be running through or above her center of gravity. My line by my trace, and it's not so high as to cut off her wind. That's the only place with this where you can go too high, is if you go too high, you can actually make it to where it's hard for her to breathe or hard for her blood to circulate, okay? And I don't want to do that. So what I want to do is place this as high as I can without getting it into her jugular or her windpipe, right? We want her to be able to breathe while we're driving. So that's kind of your basic understanding of the adjustments on the harness. The biggest thing to remember is that your center of gravity is essential. You notice that this strap here, which is the britchin, which is the braking system, runs through or above the center of gravity. You notice that the shafts, which are our turning system, right, through or above the center of gravity. And lastly, the pulling system, which is the trace, runs through or above the center of gravity. This is really important for the safety and comfort of our horse. So now that we've got our harness properly put onto our horse, we're going to go ahead and show you how to take the harness off. Okay, the way that we're going to take the harness off is we're going to start by taking down our trace, putting it back like we originally showed you, into a knot, like that. Then we're going to come up here to the shoulder strap. We're going to undo both of the buckles on the shoulder strap. Now here's really important that you don't just let go of the shoulder strap because it's just going to whack over onto the other side. So what I do is I just reach under, then let go, and it all comes off nice and easy. You can then hang this up, and then we can come back. We'll go ahead and we'll take off the crupper. A lot of people, what they do wrong is they'll try and take the whole harness off without first taking the crupper off. So take the crupper off first and buckle it back. The reason why is that the crupper has little fibers in here that you want to keep that ergonomical shape right there. So we'll buckle it back so that it can keep a hold of that shape right there. Then we'll come up here to the front, undo the belly band or the girth. We'll drop that, and she's got nothing else holding the harness onto her now. So then what a lot of people do wrong is they try and take the harness from the back to the front. And if you look at the horse, her hair is naturally growing this direction. It's not growing this direction. So when people do that, it doesn't feel very good to the horse because it's going against the flow of his hair. So what I like to do is if I take my left hand and grab a hold of the saddle, my right hand and go ahead and grab a hold of the hip strap assembly, and then I peel the whole thing off with her hair on a 45-degree angle so that we're back in the same position as we started when we put the harness on. We can then go hang this up or put it away in the barn. So another one of our most frequently asked questions is, what style of harness should you use? Should you use a harness that uses a collar like this, or a harness that uses a breast strap like we've seen earlier? Really, it's all going to come down to what you're going to be doing with your horse. If you're going to be pulling heavy loads, then there's no question that your horse should be in a collar and Hames style harness. If your horse is going to be pulling really light loads, then it's good to keep them in the breast strap style harness. The breast strap style harness is designed to make your horse look really pretty, but it's not necessarily designed for a whole lot of maximization of power. These collars were a big innovation that came along that really increased the power of the horse and made it a lot easier for him to pull loads. This collar is leather stretched over top of there's stuffing down in here made out of straw. So there's straw fibers running all the way down and around the collar. Each collar needs to fit the individual horse that you're going to be using, and the Hames that you select also need to fit the collar. You can't use a 20-inch collar with a 21-inch Hames. You would need to use 20-inch Hames with a 20-inch collar. The way that you measure a collar is going to be the effective length, not the overall length. So a lot of times when I help my friends with a little barn construction or something like that, we measure overall length, so from end to end. Okay, but collars are not measured like that. Collars are measured in what we call effective length. So they're going to be the part that actually affects the horse is going to be measured. So from the inside to the inside is what gives you your measurement. So this measurement for this collar is a 21-inch collar. Okay, this is the right size for our horse. And we also have Hames that match the collar. So what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and show you the proper way to put one of these on. What you have is you have a buckle on the top of the collar. And this buckle is how you open it up to put it onto the horse. A lot of people put their collars on up over the head. My reason for not doing that is that this horse has her eyes and her ears and a whole lot of delicate stuff up there that she doesn't necessarily like getting smashed. So it's a lot easier and nicer for her if I just open the collar and put it onto her neck that way. We're going to open it, but we got to be really careful when we open it that we don't let it open too far so as to break the fibers that are down in the bottom of this collar. If you break the fibers, you'll ruin the structural integrity of the collar, and it'll no longer function the way it was intended. It could actually hurt the horse. So when you're evaluating your collar, whether or not to use it, one of the biggest things is if you look down here at the throat, it shouldn't be any way broken. See how this is nice and smooth? If this is broken, or if the fibers are broken down right here, then it's gonna nutcracker down on top of the horse's neck, okay? And that's gonna cause him pain, and it'll lose the entire purpose of using a collar. Okay, so I'll unbuckle it, and then I'll keep it in one hand to where it's not gonna flop open. Okay, so it's gonna open, but I don't want to open it too far. If it opens too far, it breaks the fibers. So again, I'm gonna hold it in my right hand, approach the horse, make sure she's good with me. Then I'm gonna put my collar on. When I put the collar on, I'm gonna go ahead and start real high on her throat and then shift it back. Okay, the reason why is because it's a whole lot easier to get this distance from here to here than it is from here to here. Okay, it's real easy to get too much hair. You notice her mane's on her right side. And if I do it this way, I'll get no mane and no hair. So I start up high, shift it back, then I can grab it with my right hand. I can bring it over here and buckle it up. So it's in place. Making sure to go back through the keeper. So we've got it buckled up here, use the keeper, and place it back onto her shoulder in the position that it's gonna be when she's driving. Then I can step over here and grab my Hames. These are what are called Hames and traces. The traces are fixed to the Hames. Now what I'll do is I'll do the exact same as what I did with the breast strap. I'll just lay them right up and over, place them, and then buckle them on the bottom. Once you have them buckled here on the bottom, then they function exactly the same as the breast strap does. You want to go ahead and make sure that you get it nice and snug so that your Hames are seated into the collar. If your collar pulling down your hames, pulling down your hames tight crunches your collar down, it's a good sign that your collar's probably lost its structural integrity. I want to be able to pull those down, and I want to see even seating from the top of the hame all the way to the bottom of the hame. If there's excess, if there's seating here and it's touching at the top, but there's no seat through the middle and a seat at the bottom, that means I have pressure points at the bottom and the top, and through time that could create some pain for the horse. So I want it to seat well, and once we have it in this position, it's going to function exactly the same as our breast strap does, just a little different putting it on, and that's how that functions. So sizing and fitting your collar is a very elaborate subject, and it's not something that I could very easily explain to you over the video. More importantly, kind of what I want you to do is get a good feel for what it should look like. Okay, so what it should look like is that I should be able to take my collar and push it up against her shoulder. This mare's a little fat, so you can see how it compresses the fat and goes down against her shoulder. Okay, I should be able to push it up against her shoulder and then be able to slide my hand into the throat of the collar to where I could fit my hand easily into it. I don't want it to be that I slide my hand in and have no connection with flesh, and I also don't want it to feel like I'm jamming my hand in there real hard. Okay, the problem, if it's too long, if the collar is too long, then my point of draft, which is where my load connects to my collar, will be too low. Okay, so this right here is where the point of draft is going to be. And when I hitch her to a vehicle, if her collar was too long, her point of draft could be all the way down here. And she would then be stuck lifting her head, trying to get her collar into the right position, okay? Too small, and it's gonna pinch her neck, okay? But I always try and err towards the side of nice and small, okay? Because the smaller is gonna fit better, and it's gonna feel better as she goes down the road. If you feel like a collar and hames is something you're really interested in, the best, easiest way to get the right fitting collar is it's just like shoes, and that's to go try on a bunch of them. You can go try one on, get a reference point and say, okay, this is a 21-inch collar. It's 1 inch too small or 1 inch too big or whatever it is. And then you can go ahead and size yourself into the right category. So for that, I'd go to my local harness maker, and they usually have a stock of these collars around just for that purpose, to size and fit right to your horse. So we've talked about the pulling system of the harness, the braking system of the harness, and the steering system of the harness. And we showed you how to put them onto your horse and how to adjust them. Now we're going to start to talk about the most important system, and that system is called the communication system. In the communication system, you're going to have what's going to be a bridle and lines, okay? Or if you're more of an English or East Coast style, then it's going to be called reins. That comes back to the thing we talked about earlier about vernacular, in that certain areas they're going to call it a blind bridle, and others are going to call it blinkers. So some people call these blinkers, and some call them blinders, okay? And a lot of it is East Coast versus West Coast, and English style driving versus Western style driving. Okay, it all kind of means the same thing, so it's not really something I get too worried about. And I like to use, I like to move my vernacular around as I move around the country. Because if I'm teaching on the West Coast, then they think I'm wrong if I call them blinkers, and then if I'm on the East Coast, they think I'm wrong if I call them blinders. Okay, so it all means the same thing. It's these things right here, and the purpose of these is to prevent rearward view. Okay, and a really important note is that if your horse was trained in blinkers or blinders, and you're not sure if he's been in an open bridle or a bridle with no blinkers or blinders, it's really important that you not just put your horse into a bridle without them. Okay, it's something that you need to train the horse to be out of them. Because remember, when we talked about the three things, it's the sight, the sound, and the feel of being driven. That's what makes up a driving horse. Okay, and the sight, if your horse was trained with these with the purpose of hiding the vehicle, if you all of a sudden hitched him up without these, there's a good chance that the horse would run away. So it's important that you not just cut these off and throw them away. I would make sure that you retrain your horse to be in an open bridle. We're talking about the communication system here. Okay, so we've got our bridle, and we're going to be talking about open bridle, blind bridle. This horse, she's gotten to a point in her life where she mostly is going to go into a bridle without blinds. She does not need blinds anymore. But there are times when she will use them. And so it's important that if you are going to use them, that you get them put on correctly and you get them organized correctly to where they're actually going to do the purpose that they were intended. I've seen a lot of people, they put a blind bridle onto a horse and they might as well have not put it onto him because of the fact that they have the blind set completely wrong to where the horse still has full rearward view or a very, very good rearward view, okay? So it's important to get them set right. Another thing too is these bridles have a lot to them. There's a lot more to this style of a bridle than the open bridles or the kind of more riding style bridles. They're real light and easy to put onto a horse. So this has a lot of bulk to it and a lot of stuff on it. So one of the biggest things that's really, really important is that you organize the bridle well before you get it onto the horse, okay? You don't want to organize it as you're putting it onto the horse because then by then it's too late, okay? So what I want to do is I want to look at my bridle and make sure that I can see where my horse's face is going to fit into here, okay? If I couldn't see my horse's face was going to fit in, I wouldn't want to put it onto her. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put this on and adjust it properly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put this blind bridle onto a horse. One of the first things too, I talked about organizing the bridle, but also organize your horse a little, right? I don't want it to be that her hair is in a big mess because I'm about ready to put a whole lot of leather up there, and I want it to be well organized before it goes to her, okay? So I've got her fairly decent for in the breeze. I'll take and lay my side check rein up over top of her head. Then I'll take and I'll put my right arm up over top of her head, just like a saddle horse. Keep everything nice and organized. I'll slip the bit into her mouth, push her far ear in, then her near ear. And then I've got the job of getting all this organized. So a lot of these bridles are designed to where you actually keep the mane or the forelock up underneath. Some of them you can kind of pull out, but can you see how that kind of ends up with a bit of a goofy look on there? So a lot of times people just keep them underneath. It just comes down to personal preference. I've not seen any practical reason to not to. On a driving bridle, the throat latch, you're gonna actually keep a little more snug than on a riding bridle. The reason why is that that's what's keeping this bridle on her head. Especially a horse that rubs its head a lot around, you really don't want that bridle to be rubbing off of her head, okay? Like if you have a horse in blinds and especially if somebody else trained it and they didn't necessarily train it to be real confident with the load, if it gets to rubbing and it peels this blind up over her eye, then it could be really dangerous. So it's important that the throat latch be fairly secure and fairly snug. I'll go ahead and do her little cavesson. This is kept fairly loose. And then her chin strap. These driving style chin straps, they'll use a lot of times they'll use a ringed one like this. And the key to them is that you rotate them. And it depends on how it's hung, but normally it's that you rotate it clockwise and it lays down flat. Can you see how all of these rings are nice and flat? If you rotate it the wrong direction, it just snarls up and it ends up being a big old mess. So if you rotate it clockwise, it lays down flat, and then you're able to then hook it into this hook on the side of her bridle, okay? So now the adjustment stage kind of comes along here in that we need to adjust that her blinds are effective. It's extremely dangerous if your blinds aren't in the right position because of the fact that your horse can see to the rear, okay? If I'm gonna put blinds onto a horse, I want them to be doing their job, if that makes any sense. Like I don't want to put them on there and have them not being effective. And so the key to them being effective is if you look at the blind, I break it down in my mind into thirds. So there's three pieces. There's a top, a middle, and a bottom. And then if I look at her eye, and I think about it being in about half, let me get this hair out of here. Okay, if you think about her eye being in half, I would want the center of her eye to hit this lower third of the blind. Okay, and the reason why is that if she gets scared as we're driving along, the load is behind her, what's she gonna do? She's gonna raise her head, and if she raises her head, can you see how that tips the blind to where she can see clearly to the rear? It's not doing anything. It's only practical for when she has her head down, which when she gets scared, her head's gonna go up anyways, and she's gonna look to the rear, and that's just gonna scare her more. So it's really important that we get the blind high enough that if she lifted her head, she wouldn't be able to see to the rear. Okay, so we'll lift the blind. There's little lifts on the side of your bridle that their purpose is simply to lift the blind. Okay, and what I'm looking to get to, you can see how this side's pretty good, but this side's too low still. Okay, so I'll come over here to this side. And if you raise the blind, a lot of times you have to lower the bit because they're connected. So if you raise the blind, a lot of times that raises the bit also, so you need to lower the bit. Okay. If you want your blinds to be effective and for safety, it's really important that your blinds be very high. Remember that there's 3 pieces to the blind, thirds, and then if you get her eye to hit the lower third. So you can see that this is pretty close to ideal. It's just a little low, but it would be effective enough to work. But ideally, it would go up one more hole. We could go up one more. Okay, so another thing to notice about these blinds is that they're really wide. They're not touching her eyelash. There's nothing about that that's touching or assaulting her eyeball. Okay, a lot of blinds people use they're real tight like this, and the horse can only see forwards. I don't like that kind of blind. I like a blind that has a real wide stay and that really kicks the blind open real far to where you're not really taking away any peripheral vision or any side vision. You're just really blocking the rearward view. That's really important for the horse's comfort and also for safety, because someday you'd like to eventually hopefully drive the horse without blinds also. So it's a lot harder to switch from those real tunnel vision style blinds to a real open blind. So most of your driving bridles that you're going to see are going to come with what's called a side check or an over check. A side check is this rein here that comes from the bit up through these little teardrop guides, up around here, through this ring, up on the top of the saddle, and then back around the other side the exact same way that it came up this way. So it's a giant loop rein. Then the other alternative one is what's called an over check. Okay, so an over check is going to come from this same ring, but it's not going to split. It's not a loop. It's just going to run straight up the middle of her head, and then it's going to come down the front of her face, and then it'll split right here at her nose and come from here to here. Okay, the purpose of an over check is to alter the horse's carriage. Okay, it's to affect the way that they naturally carry themselves. At some point or another, the driving horse industry got to where we really like the look of a horse with his nose out. We like the head up and the nose out. And the over check naturally is going to do that. Okay, so the over check runs up and over. You can see that if this was on top of her face, coming down here, and if I pulled it tight, it would push her nose out and lift her head up. Okay. Now, I don't personally like those because I feel that that hollows a horse out, and I don't think it looks very good. I don't like the way a horse looks when he's in an over check. I like the way a horse looks if he's in a side check if I'm going to use anything, okay? And the purpose of the side check is simply to prevent untimely grazing. Okay, you can see that if she was to lower her head to try and eat something, that it would eventually engage this rein, right? And it would pull her head back up, or it would prevent her from getting her head onto the ground. If you've ever long lined your horse out in the grass or something like that, then you've probably felt that awful feeling of having your horse with its nose on the ground eating, because you have no control at that point. You have no control over the horse, and it's quite dangerous. Okay, so it's really important that this is a very big safety feature, and it's essential for a lot of horses because of the fact that the horse wouldn't know what to do if you tried to get it to lift its head back up. So this is just simply to prevent untimely grazing, keeps them from getting their nose on the ground. It's not intended for head modification, right? It's not intended to lift the head, and it's not intended to lift the nose in any way. Its intention is simply that if she tried to put her nose on the ground to eat, it would encourage her to lift her head back up, okay? So that's my preference, is to use the side check. The over check, again, the problem with that is some people, they say, well, just set it really loose and you could get the same effect. You could still get it to where the horse could not graze. And that is true, but when the horse goes down, when he hits it, it tips his nose up. And I don't like that. I don't like to do anything that's lifting the nose out away from me. I like a horse to have a nice soft feel and a nice soft face, just like what you would want with your ridden horse. The adjustment for this in my mind would be that if she was working, her head would be lower, and I would want her head to be able to get down to a good working height. I would not want it to be able to get any lower than a good healthy working height. Think about like when they really power into their work, they're going to get low, the head's going to get low, so you don't want to prevent that because you'd prevent the horse's power. Okay, so the adjustment here is that she could get her head down, but she couldn't get it to the ground. And so, so like I said, its purpose primarily is going to be to keep her from grazing. So I've got my horse bridled up in her bridle, ready to go for a drive here. And what I've done is I've bridled her, and then I've gone ahead and put her halter on over top of her bridle. The reason I do that is so that I can put all this stuff on here. I can put my reins on, put everything on, and be ready to go. And all I have to do is just take the halter off, and she's ready to go. One other little thing too to notice is that, like right here, she's in a cradle bridle. Come here. She's in a cradle bridle, and I like these bridles because of the bit in them. I like bits that encourage straightness and engagement. I don't like bits that are one-handed bits. So pretty much the only bit I really don't like to see people driving in is a snaffle bit. That kind of bit is really dangerous because it really encourages bending, and driving's not a bending sport. So they pick a big fight with a horse by putting the wrong kind of bridle in. There's a whole, you could take a college course on just the right kind of bridles and the right kind of bits and all that kind of thing, and it's just something I would be really particular about. Make sure you're using a driving purposed bit, or something that is in purpose of straightness and of engagement, not something that encourages bending, okay? So now that we've got her all bridled up and ready to go, we're gonna go ahead and put our lines onto the horse, or our reins. Remember, East Coast, you're gonna be hearing more people call them reins. Carriage drivers are gonna call them reins. West Coast, like heavy horse drivers, things like that, they're gonna call them lines. It's the exact same thing. It's just a different part of the country, different vernacular, okay? So what we have is we have buckle-in reins here. And these reins I don't like to use if I'm gonna be hitching my horse to a vehicle. I don't like to use reins that have a snap on them. Most reins, when you order a harness, are gonna come with an additional snap on the end of the line here. And the problem with that is that she could reach over here and scratch herself on a piece of harness and accidentally snap herself into it. Okay, so as we start to continue along here, training our horses and actually driving our horses, some safety considerations start to come into play more than when we're just messing around with long lines. Okay, so the big safety consideration here is buckle-in lines, okay? Because of the fact that she's not gonna be able to rub hard enough to figure out how to snap this into something else. What we'll go ahead and do here is we'll go ahead and put these on our horse. What we'll do is we'll run them through these rein guides. There's rein guides. I prefer harnesses that have a rein guide on the shoulder strap and a rein guide on the saddle. I don't particularly like it when they have one back here on the hip strap. A lot of Amish-made harnesses are gonna have that. My reason why I don't like it is because it adds a lot of extra friction. Each rein guide that you run through dulls the feel for the horse. Okay, so I've already run it through 2. Adding one more, to me, it makes it to where the releases aren't as nice and the softness can't be as good, okay? Because the less friction, the better is kind of the way I look at that. So what I'll do, if you had a collar and hames on here, this would be the exact same. The collar and hames, that hame's gonna have a rein guide on it right up here next to, up high in the exact same spot as where this shoulder one is on this style harness. So what we'll do is we'll run our line through the rear and then through the front ring. We can pull them down and lay them there. Now, something really important is what a lot of people would do is they'd either drop this onto the ground or, you know, do a lot of different things, but it's really important that you treat these very, very carefully. We've talked about that the most important system on a harness is the communication system, right? It's my ability to talk to this horse. It's like, you know, it's like the most important part of your car is the ability to talk to it, to tell it when to go, when to stop, when to turn, right? If you can't do that, the functionality just goes out the window. If you were driving a car and it would just take off whenever it wanted to, and if you hit the brakes, it didn't slow down, that wouldn't be any good. So using that as my logic, I say that this is the most important thing because this is how I communicate with her that she needs to slow my vehicle, stop my vehicle, turn my vehicle, and go. So, so I prioritize these above all the rest of my harness, and I make sure that I keep them very quality. I've seen people that they drive with a totally junk harness and really nice bridle and lines, and that to me is a lot smarter than a really nice harness and a totally junk bridle and lines. These are extremely important, so I treat them with a lot of reverence. It's kind of like if you ever go mountain climbing. The worst thing you can ever do when you're mountain climbing is step on somebody's rope. That's considered extremely rude, and it's one of those things that it weakens the rope. And when that guy falls, that spot where you stepped on it against a rock, it might be the thing that kills him. So it's really important. The same thing here. I would never step on these, and I try and always prioritize them. I always try and keep them out of the dirt, out of the mud, and up off the ground, because these are my lifelines. This is what keeps me safe. If she panics, this is my way of talking to her. This is my true connection with her. So what I'll do is I'll take these and I'll actually lay them up over her back. It reminds me of a story. When I was younger, I used to go to a lot of hitch driving things with people driving big multiple hitches, and I was helping a guy one time, and he told his son, who was probably 19 or 20, he told him, don't ever let the lines touch the ground. That's what he said to him. And the son, he was just being real careless, and he had him on the ground. And the dad, in front of everybody, picks up the lines, and he goes up and he whacks a kid right across the face with the line. And I mean, it was pretty harsh, but it was the reality of how much that meant to that guy, that he was willing to do that to his son in front of everybody, embarrass the crap out of everybody. And it was because it was so important to him that these be prioritized. So I'll never forget that to the day I die. That was like one of those moments where you go, now that was very important. That's something to stick with you. So anyway, so I'll put my first line on her and I'll lay it up over her back. And then I'll go over here and I'll grab the second line, and I'll run through the rain guide, run through the back one, then through the front one, and then do the same thing. I'll just lay it up over her back so that they're nice and safe. I do think that sometimes you can take things a little too far, by all means, and so to me, keeping your lines up and prioritizing them is really important and really good. But I'm also, if they did fall for some reason, I don't panic. It's not like, I don't have to go buy a new set of lines. It's not that sort of a deal in my mind. It's just, it's more that you need to have that level of reverence. So it's not something that I just get so mad at myself if I accidentally let them touch the ground. That's okay. I just try and treat them kind of like the American flag. I try and keep them with a lot of reverence to where they're not getting in the dirt. So I'll come up here, and now since I've run my halter over top of my horse's bridle, I have to go underneath the halter, and then I buckle in to the appropriate ring on my bit. I can reach over, grab the other one, run it down the halter, over to the bridle, and buckle it in. And the nice thing about this is that I have a whole lot of communication systems on my horse right now. I have my bridle and my lines and my halter and my lead rope. And so that makes it a lot safer. It's really important that as you're learning to drive and do things like that, that since this is so important, that you're not hitching your horse without a communication system on them. Remember that it's different as you go along and as you grow and get better, then you can start to maybe break a few of the rules. But as a general rule that I follow at home and while I'm working and out and around, just for my own safety, is I try and never hitch a horse that doesn't have the communication system on them. It would be a lot like trying to saddle your horse with no bridle or anything else on it. Yeah, at some point you could saddle a horse with no halter, no bridle, nothing, and he'll stand there great, but that's not exactly a great practice for day-to-day use, okay? So we've got our lines up, run through there, and then what we'll do now is we'll take them down, because we want them to be well organized so that we're really ready for when we go to hitch her up. We want everything really well prepared. It's the same as with the harness, as with the bridle, as with everything else. You want everything prepared before you get to the next step. Okay, so what I do is I take my lines, and I'll take the black part, and I'll take both of them in my left hand, and I push them up underneath the back strap. If I could actually do it, there we go. Push them up underneath the back strap like that, to where they've just created a loop that's going through the back strap. I haven't pulled them tight. They're not pulled tight on her mouth, because I don't want to be backing her up or anything like that. I just want them to be in kind of a ready position. Then I'll take these and I'll fold them one more time and run them out like that, so that I've just created a quick release. Okay, the idea being that if I'm getting her ready, or if I hitched her up and God forbid I'd been just totally boneheaded and she wasn't ready to drive, then I could just grab onto these and pull and see how it's a quick release. So I've immediately got a hold of her and I can drive her. Okay, so if they were all in this big tangled up mess up here on her back, then there's not a lot I can do. So what I would rather do, get them organized, take them, run them up through the back strap like that, take the second loop, run it up, pull up my slack, and then they're ready to go for her to get hitched. And what I can do is then, see how these tails would go to the ground? So what I do is I just lay these up over top of her back. And then again, if at any point she panics, I can just grab a hold and I've got her.